Hey teachers, so we are in a Pinyon-Juniper Woodland right now. Briar wants to show you this lovely, oh, and you have hair. We're in a Pinyon-Juniper Woodland right now. And I want to introduce you guys to some of the plants if you don't know them, or if you do, maybe you'll learn something new. So first thing, Pinyon-Juniper Woodland, right? Ecosystems are named by their most dominant plant species. And the most dominant plant species out here, both as you go up the foothills, more into the mountains, and then of course in the East Mountains are going to be your pinyon and juniper trees. So let's start with pinyon pine. So pinyon pine is also known as the two-needle pine or the Colorado pine. And essentially the two-needle pine, hint hint, it has 2 needles per group. So the way that you can tell the difference between, say, a pine tree from like a spruce or a fir, pine trees, the needles always come in groups, and they can be in groups of 2, 3, or 5. And this one obviously is your 2-needle pinyon pine. It comes in a group of 2 needles. And then the needles are also very short. That's the difference between this and, say, a ponderosa pine. Ponderosa pine, the needles are gonna be like 6 inches long. Pinyon pine, you're looking closer to like 2 to 3 inches. So these guys are really cool in the fact that they first of all, they provide an important part of our economy, right, with all the pinyon nuts. Second of all, they are really, really slow growers. So if you see a really large pinyon pine tree, just know that it has been there for hundreds of years, which is really exciting. So the other dominant species in our Pinyon-Juniper Woodland is obviously the juniper, and we have 3 species out here in the Sandias. We have the alligator juniper, the one-seed juniper, and the Rocky Mountain juniper. Now the one that you're going to see the most often, the one that's in the foothills, is the one-seed juniper, and it's kind of prickly, right? It feels pretty rough and stuff. What makes a juniper tree different from, say, a pine is they have scaled leaves. So think about the leg of a bird and how you can see the scales going down the leg, or maybe even the leg of a lizard. These leaves looks like scales that would be on a bird's leg. So they're really easy to identify. I don't know if I can turn my camera around. I'll show you guys the picture a little bit closer, but easy to identify. And if you can see those little brown spots kind of at the end of the branches, and those were actually pollen cones that were giving off pollen back in the spring. So a lot of our allergies here in this area that happen in the like end of winter, early spring, is from juniper trees. So if you ever see an orange one and it looks different than the rest, it doesn't look as green, it's probably because it's a male. So cool thing about junipers, they are dioecious, which dioecious means a plant that's either male or female, or maybe the plant grows branches that are either male or female. And this is a male tree because it has the pollen cones. Now the female trees have berries. They're not actually berries, right? Because this is a conifer, and so they're actually modified cones, which is really cool. And that's the difference between junipers and versus cedar or cypress. Cedar and cypress actually have true like cones, whereas all junipers always have berries. Some berries are toxic, just FYI. One seed, they're not. They just, probably aren't that good. The female juniper trees are going to have the berries, and the male juniper trees are going to have these pollen cones that are going to be bright orange in the spring, and they're just going to kind of look like the end of a branch that died, and they're going to be brown in the fall. So this is another really common species, both in Pinyon-Juniper Woodlands, in the upland, like the grassland areas, also in kind of the desert areas. It's called Chamisa, is what it's commonly known as here. The more common name is called rubber rabbit brush, and essentially it is kind of this grayish green, and in the fall it's a really important plant because it's one of the few flowering plants that stays flowering long into fall and provides nectar for so many important species. So it's a really cool species, really important to have around. And there's a fly species. Oh, there's one. So you can see on any Chamisa, you can basically just kind of get close to it, and you're going to see these little balls. And these balls are called galls. And we might need to open this one up. They contain maggots. So it's fly larvae, and I believe it's a tephritid fly, but you can see them all over the Chamisa, all in this area, and they're really cool, especially in the summer, to open them up and you find a little present inside, and it's a little larva, which is kind of cool. It's also my understanding that these guys provided rubber whenever rubber supplies were really, really low during World War II, which is kind of cool. So a really cool animal species that's seen all throughout this area are what we call harvester ants. Harvester ants, they are kind of a medium-sized ant. They're not as big as carpenter ants, but they're obviously not as small as, say, sugar ants. But the cool thing about them, I don't know if you guys can see this, but their mounds are really, really easy to recognize. They essentially look like a moonscape. So they remove all the plant matter around them, and they decorate and I say decorate, it might just be them just being practical and moving stuff around, but their mounds are all covered in these tiny pebbles, and they end up looking like moonscapes. And one thing that's cool about them is that they are the primary diet for horned lizards. So if your students like horned lizards, you can tell them how important these harvester ant mounds are, and you know, why we need to kind of protect these species. Also, they're called harvester ants, so they harvest seeds, right? And it's really important part of seed dispersal and how plants move and get planted in other areas.